They framed her, laughed in her face, and believed she was permanently gone, until she returned as their new supervisor. They did not even wait for the hallway to clear. At 10:42 a.m. on a Thursday, 4 uniformed officers, whom Marisol Bennett had previously mentored, invaded her office with their hands already on their shackles, as if they had been practicing the situation all morning. One of them exclaimed, "Marisol Bennett," in an excessively loud voice, "for obstruction of justice, abuse of authority, and evidence tampering, you are currently being held in custody. There is no subpoena, there is no explanation, there were only frigid stares, and a camera crew waiting outside, as if it were a performance." She refrained from engaging in a debate, refrained from screaming, did not inquire as to the rationale. She gazed at them, particularly Officer Brent Halden, who was unable to conceal the smirk that was curling up his face. She slowly stood up, holding out her palms. "Subsequently, proceed." They conducted her through the 9th District Precinct in Eugene, Oregon, as though she were a criminal. Her badge was still affixed to her thigh. The pistol remains in its holster. No one spoke. The sergeant at the front counter retreated. She maintained minimal eye contact with a novice, who she had assisted in successfully completing firearms training. Everyone was aware. The murmurs were audible to all. Some had even assisted in their dissemination. She had served as a member of the force for 21 years. Her outerwear was impeccably maintained. Accolades, high-profile cases, no suspensions. There are no inquiries. And now, she was abruptly a threat. The local media surrounded the area, in a manner reminiscent of vultures. Marisol maintained her head held high, but she could hear them clearly, cameras clicking, reporters shrieking inquiries, such as, "Are you cooperating with the investigation? And is it true that you stole narcotics from the evidence room?" She did not respond. "I have just boarded the cruiser." The detention was not motivated by the pursuit of justice. It was a message. She comprehended it with a resounding conviction. Brent Halden ensured that he occupied the rear seat adjacent to her. Although not strictly adhering to protocol, they were no longer adhering to the established rules. He leaned in, allowing her to detect the stagnant coffee odor on his breath. "You ought to have refrained from meddling, Bennett," he murmured. "Now take a look at you." She maintained her composure. She whispered, "I have never been frightened of the dark. I simply possess a more comprehensive understanding of it than you do." He did not respond. However, the twitch in his mandible was sufficient. She was fingerprinted, photographed, and confined to a holding chamber for 6 hours at the station. Her attorney was not permitted to enter until the 4th hour. It was intentional. Allow the press sufficient time to publish, grant the rumor sufficient airtime to ignite. She was already the subject of headlines. By the time her attorney entered the room, "Your file has been sealed," Kendrick Lowe, her attorney, announced before retiring to the metal chair situated across from her. "They are asserting that the situation is not yet official, but it is unsavory. Internal Affairs is not even responsible for this matter. It originated from the district's highest echelons." She gradually exhaled. "Do you believe it is Halden?" Kendrick gave a single vote. He and a few others. "It is a coordinated strike. I am uncertain as to what you trod on, but they are concealing something. Additionally, they are concerned that you may uncover it." She fixed her gaze on the wall. "I am not incensed, not in a state of despair, quiet." For some time, she had harbored suspicions regarding the disappearance of files, the rerouting of cases without explanation, and the editing of evidence records. However, when she attempted to inquire about it, she was informed that she was being overly cautious. They had now explicitly stated that asking inquiries was a risk. She became a target, due to her candor. Additionally, this was not solely about her. The wrong names were implicated, resulting in the burying of cases, and the disregard of rights for individuals. Assuming that she was descending, she was not traveling alone. She was released 6 hours later. There are no formal fees. There is no explanation. There is no need for an apology. A file labeled pending review, and an entire station of officers, observing her as if she were already convicted. She did not speak when she exited the precinct. However, she made a single call from the parking lot. Not to her family, not to the press, to the mayor. She stated into the phone, "It is time we had that conversation, and I would like to have all of the information available." However, as Marisol quietly receded from the public view, the individuals who had framed her began to unwind, believing that they had already prevailed. No messages were returned by Marisol. She did not respond to the text. No contribution was made. Absence of sightings. There is no statement. It was as though she had vanished. Additionally, this was advantageous for the 9th District Precinct. Officers conducted themselves as though nothing had transpired for an entire week. Brent Halden was observed in the break room, where he was heard telling quips. He beamed as he chewed on a powdered donut, as if the entire situation had been a game. Perhaps she finally realized she wasn't one of us. He was followed by laughter, not because it was amusing, but because individuals were apprehensive about not laughing. Captain Dwight Penley, who authorized Marisol's detention, maintained that he was simply adhering to the established protocol. However, it was widely recognized that he was obligated to repay substantial favors. His abrupt ascent through the ranks had been anything but tranquil. Additionally, Marisol, she was one of the few officers who was unafraid to inquire about the process. However, her absence resulted in a decrease in activity, a reduction in the level of tension in the atmosphere. The questioning of files ceased. Decisions were not second-guessed. Halden and his crew, who had always conducted themselves with an air of impunity, became even more daring. They began to log out early, redistributing calls to new employees in the event of a missing report or a botched interview, items that would be overlooked by the general public. However, Marisol has consistently maintained this possession. She used to maintain the integrity of others, even if it resulted in her being controversial. Presently, that position was not occupied by anyone, not even close. However, as they became more at ease, rumors began to circulate beyond the station's perimeter. One of the bartenders at Winston's Tavern reported that he had overheard two municipal clerks discussing a confidential meeting at Municipal Hall, which was related to federal involvement. Other rumors suggested that Marisol had been observed entering the Department of Justice building in Salem. No one was able to verify it. However, it was sufficient to induce discomfort in certain individuals. Detective Nina Rowe, who had been employed by Marisol for 3 years, refrained from chuckling with the others. She maintained her composure, pursued her cases, and refrained from engaging in office gossip. She was aware, however, that something was amiss. One afternoon, she discovered Halden standing at her workstation, perusing one of her case folders. "I was unaware that this was under your jurisdiction," he stated, his gaze remaining fixed on the file. "It is not," she replied, "but the lead witness requested my assistance." He peered up, gradually closing the file. "Rowe, exercise caution. You do not wish to become like Bennett." She did not respond. Rather, she removed the file from his hand and proceeded to walk away. However, her stomach was in a complete state of turmoil. She retrieved her archived messages that evening and reread the final message Marcel had sent her, which was sent 2 days prior to the arrest. "Do not trust Halden in the event of any unforeseen circumstances. Investigate the Langford case in greater detail. Missing medications are not the only issue. Commence at that point." The Langford case was determined to be a dead end, as it was a suspected overdose that concluded with a silent file closure. However, Marisol had consistently expressed doubt regarding the timeline. The witness statements were inconsistent. The chain of evidence had been disrupted. Rowe had relinquished it at that time. Presently, she was uncertain as to whether she ought to have done so. In the interim, Marisol had rented a short-term property in Corvallis, under a different name. Absence of photographs. Absence of documentation. "I require only a peaceful environment and time to work." She was not concealing herself. Rather, she was devising a strategy. She had been owed a favor by a local technology company. They assisted her in the development of a database of internal affairs records, which was used to cross-reference incidents that were either discreetly buried, reclassified, or erased entirely. She discovered more than mere negligence. It was a consistent pattern. Halden, Officer Kent Riddell, Sergeant Tom Avery, and Captain Penley were consistently referenced in reports. The pattern was unmistakable. Missing evidence, excessive force and witness coercion, all were sorted through bureaucratic layers and assigned distinct case numbers. Numerous victims. Certain cases were resolved within hours of their filing. Others simply disappeared. Every name, date, and complaint were publicized. She then circled the ones that overlapped, 27 of them. It was no longer a matter of retrieving her identification. It was a matter of dismantling a system that safeguarded predators in uniform. However, They were not merely unwinding at the precinct. They were preparing for their forthcoming celebration. The mayor's office was situated on the 4th floor of a beige government building near the riverfront, sandwiched between a dental clinic and a bail bonds agency. There is nothing noteworthy, there is nothing exciting. However, a grave situation was developing behind its opaque glass doors. Marisol had been acquainted with Mayor Helen Trujillo for an extended period of time. There was mutual respect, despite the fact that they did not always concur. Helen had observed Marisol eliminate a drug corridor on 8th Street without firing a single shot. She had observed her de-escalate violent conversations with nothing more than a calm voice and clear eyes. Helen cleared her afternoon when Marisol requested 10 minutes worth of her time. Marisol did not squander her time. "I require a federal inquiry into the 9th District," she stated, placing a folder on Helen's desk. "What I am about to demonstrate has been occurring without your knowledge." Helen refrained from speaking for the initial 5 minutes, as she perused documents, photographs and names. In one report, a young woman was depicted with bruises on her mandible, and her assault complaint was clearly indicated. No further action is required. Another example was a body camera transcript that was abruptly terminated during the arrest. Marisol had cross-referenced, dated, and color-coded each entry that was questionable. "How many instances are there?" Helen ultimately inquired. "Those are the only ones that I could verify. Additional information is available." Helen massaged her temples. "Why did I fail to observe any of this?" They never had the opportunity. The majority of these never made it to them. Reports were either denied or redirected. Ghost logins were implemented by certain officers. Internal Affairs was intentionally prevented from being involved. The folder was touched by Helen with her pen. "Do you wish to conduct the investigation?" "No," Marisol replied. "I require complete access. The records, audits and archives are what I am seeking. Please provide me with supervision. I will provide you with a department and offices that are tidy. However, I prefer to do so from the inside." Mayor Trujillo reclined in her chair. "Are you aware of the significance of this?" "Indeed, it indicates that they will come after me once more. However, I am not restraining myself this time." A federal liaison was appointed 3 days later. Marisol was discreetly reinstated as Internal Affairs Commander by the City Council the following week, with a temporary federal mandate to supervise officer conduct in Eugene's 9th District. The vote was conducted behind closed doors. There is no press release. There will be no press conference. Only a signed document with a new insignia and mission. In the interim, Holden and his team were preparing for their anticipated court victory. Marisol's allegations had been dismissed. However, they were not concerned with the technicalities. It appeared to them that the city had abandoned its plans. They organized drinks for that Friday evening, referring to it as a send-off to the witch hunt. Even Captain Penley arrived in denim and a button-down, ordering pitchers, as if it were a promotion party. Detective Rowe elected to remain at home. She had been compiling data on the Langford case for the entire week, and had observed an alarming development. The initial officer on the scene was Officer Kent Riddell. However, no body camera footage was submitted. This is not unusual in and of itself. However, his camera data indicated that it had been operational for nearly 7 minutes. However, it had never been uploaded. She submitted a request to the technical unit. She then executed an audacious action. Marisol received an email from her. She was uncertain as to whether it would be accepted, but she proceeded to type it. "I have faith in you. There are additional aspects to Langford. It is feasible for me to demonstrate this. Please allow me to assist you." Only 20 minutes later, the response was received. "I will be available on Monday. Ground that is neutral. Arrive in solitude." 2 years ago, an abandoned library on the east side was decommissioned. The location was annexed. That was a dangerous proposition. However, Rowe arrived early, his pulse racing and his hands shaking. Marisol was already inside, pacing with documents in her hand. She smiled when she turned and saw Rowe, not as if she was seeking revenge, but as if she had finally discovered an ally who was worthy of their trust. They conversed for nearly 2 hours. Rowe brought the items she possessed, including prints, statements, and timestamps. Marisol drew a comprehensive map of the corruption network. It was not merely malfeasance that they observed forming.
There was a cover-up that dated back at least 7 years. Nevertheless, the precinct was about to receive an unexpected visitor, as the two were attempting to ascertain the rot beneath the insignia. When the double doors to the courtroom swung open, they were still passing around donuts and making quips. The pre-hearing for Officer Holden's testimony was a mere formality, consisting of documentation to verify that the case against Marisol had been dismissed. In a smug mood, Holden entered the room, accompanied by Captain Penley and 2 other officers from his coterie. In silence, Rose sat at the rear of the room, her eyes observing each movement. The woman who followed the federal liaison was a surprise that no one anticipated or was prepared for. A vertebrae that is straight, a black tuxedo. She is wearing a new insignia that is shining brightly on her hip. Marisol Bennett. At first she did not speak. Rather she proceeded to the judge's bench and presented a sealed envelope. The judge reviewed the letter, adjusted his spectacles, and then surveyed the courtroom. Let it be noted that Marisol Bennett has been officially appointed as the Internal Affairs Commander under federal authority, with jurisdiction over the 9th District, as of this morning. The room was filled with murmurs, reminiscent of the rising vapor. Captain Penley stood. "Your Honor, this information was not disclosed to the department." The judge responded with a dry smirk. "That's because it wasn't your call. The Mayor and the Department of Justice are utilizing emergency powers as outlined in Title 18. She is not present as a defendant. She is present to observe the testimony of today, and to commence her examination of the conduct of the officers."
Penley's lips initially opened, and then promptly shut. Holden's complexion became paler. Marisol slowly and deliberately scanned the room, until her gaze fell upon the group of officers who had led her out of the precinct just weeks prior. She approached them with composure and composure. "Good morning," she greeted. "I am eager to collaborate with each of you. Effective immediately, I am responsible for the supervision of all internal complaints, audits, and reviews associated with this district. I hope that everyone's documentation is in order." There was no laughter. The silence that ensued was dense, as if someone had extracted the oxygen from the room. Marisol maintained her composure. She was not required to. Her mere presence sufficed. Holden remained seated, unable to respond to routine inquiries. As the judge resumed the hearing, the grin had vanished. Just once, his voice broke. Rowe observed a faint twitching in his hands, as if he was uncertain about where to place them. Marisol entered the hallway unaccompanied. After the session concluded, Rowe followed. Rowe whispered, "You neglected to notify me. I was unable to do so until it was secured." A close nod was given by Rowe. "They are likely to experience a state of panic." Marisol responded, "I am relying on it. That is the point at which individuals begin to make errors." The atmosphere had changed by the time the group returned to the precinct later that afternoon. Corners were occupied by officers who murmured. Phones were being erased. The screens turned dark. Captain Penley convened an emergency meeting when she passed by. His voice trembled more than he intended. "This department functions on the principles of discipline and trust," he stated, evading Marisol's gaze. "We should maintain a professional and transparent demeanor throughout this transition." A person in the rear of the room discreetly snorted. Subsequently, no inquiries were submitted. Marisol entered her new office, which was previously utilized for filing overflow. A room with no windows, 2 desks, and inadequate illumination. She was indifferent. She brought her own lamp. Taped a quote above her desk, she sat in her own chair. If they dreaded doing it in front of you, they were aware that it was an error. She had her initial 10 cases extracted from the archive by sunset. All of the names she had previously flagged were marked as inactive. She generated duplicates. Rowe was subsequently contacted. She stated, "Interviews will commence tomorrow." However, prior to the conclusion of the day, a single officer departed the precinct early and proceeded directly to Holden's residence with a warning. Holden stood by the window of his 2-story residence in West Eugene, sipping from a chipped mug, observing headlamps pass, as if they were carrying answers. Since the courtroom ambush, he had not spoken much. Not to his wife, not to his counsel, not even to Penley. Conversely, an individual started to tap. Officer Kent Riddell, the youngest member of the inner circle, entered the building. He scarcely closed the door before he whispered, "Brent Langford's file was extracted by her and is currently located in her office." Holden refrained from moving. He continued to gaze at the street. And Roe, he inquired. She is assisting her. The old tech logs are also available. Holden clenched the mug until a fracture appeared along the side. Oh my God. Nervous, Riddell shifted. We must take action. No, replied Holden. Not yet. If we exert ourselves excessively, it will appear as though we are in a state of panic. We must remain composed. She desires that we become anxious. However, the perspiration was already present, accumulating on his temples and trailing behind his collar. Marisol was the first to appear at the station the following morning, surpassing all others. She parked in the side lot and proceeded through the rear entrance, and beyond the break room, where 3 officers abruptly ceased to speak. The building's rhythm had already been disrupted by her presence. People were no longer relaxing, they were not amused. Each stride she took caused an individual to tremble. A list was posted on the notice board by her. Week 1 mandatory internal interviews. Officer Kent Riddell, Sherry Ames, Detective Lieutenant Brian Vostek, Brent Holden. An officer dates and times were adhered to. Signatures are mandatory. There are no justifications. The building was abuzz with activity by 9 a.m., resembling a wasp colony that had been disturbed with a stick. Although her name was not spoken, she could sense it in the air. Initially, Riddell was interviewed. She escorted him into the office, discreetly closed the door, and provided him with water. He rejected it. Let us discuss the Langford scene from 3 years ago, March 12. Your body camera was operational for 7 minutes. What is the location of the footage? Riddell hesitated. I am uncertain. It should have been uploaded. Did I? It is possible that there was an error. The technician was responsible for verifying those. Marisol folded her hands and bent forward. You have only one opportunity to tell the truth, as the badge will not shield you if I discover that you were involved in any cover-up. Not any longer. Riddell's irises widened. He was alive when I arrived, he finally stated, his voice trembling. Langford, he was respiring. I reported it to Holden, who advised me not to include it in the log, said that it would exacerbate the situation. What was his intention? He did not provide any information. I was instructed to remain silent, said that the individual was an addict, and that the event had already concluded. I was instructed to eliminate the footage. Marisol did not respond. She merely jotted down a note. Are you prepared to provide that statement under oath? Riddell took a deep breath and announced, yes. She let him go without uttering a word. That evening, she typed up the transcript and submitted a copy to the federal liaison. Although it was insufficient to make arrests at this time, it was sufficient to provide Holden with notice. The pressure was effective, as Holden was in a state of disarray at his residence. He was unable to eat or sleep, and he had begun contacting old friends in an attempt to secure favors, inquire about loopholes, immunity, or any other potential solutions. However, it was too late for that. Darnell Coates, a youthful patrol officer, dropped off a USB in Marisol's inbox without a note. Upon opening it, she discovered audio from 2 years ago, which featured Holden threatening a witness off the record. Despite the fact that no one had ever reported the incident, it was now hers. The cracks were also visible within the precinct. Marisol played it on repeat for nearly 10 minutes. She no longer relied on her intuitive feelings. She had evidence, and the pieces were aligning more rapidly than she had anticipated. However, as she prepared for the subsequent round of interviews, an individual within the department decided to respond. Unfortunately, it was not through paperwork. Marisol discovered a shattered tail light on her way out to get coffee before daybreak. The rear corner of her government-issued vehicle had been dented by a heavy object. There was no note, no camera, in the back lot, and only silence. She did not report the incident. Rather, she replaced the bulb herself, drove to work early, and reviewed her next 3 interview files. Officer Holden was originally scheduled for Friday, but she rescheduled him for Wednesday. She was aware that it was him. The broken tail light was a message. However, if he intended to intimidate her, he underestimated the depth of her resolve. Holden entered the residence at 9:10 a.m., attempting to maintain a casual demeanor by placing his hands in his pockets and reclining back as if he had nothing to conceal. He sat down and stated, "You removed me from my rotation for this." Marisol responded without glancing up, You have been reassigned to administrative duties pending review, effective yesterday. The smirk momentarily returned. I understand. Is it true that you are currently experiencing a state of stupor? That is a conversation between you and a witness named Olivia March, dated February 9, 2021. She slid a printed transcript across the desk. It was captured off-site. In exchange for the removal of an allegation, you instructed her to retract her statement. Does that sound familiar? The paper was not touched by Holden. Do you truly believe that you will construct a structure from scraps? He inquired. Are you no longer a police officer? You are a paper pusher with a grudge on your shoulder. The volume of Marisol's voice did not increase. You are incapable of comprehending my identity. You believe that this is about retribution.
You continue to maintain the illusion that you are secure due to the support of others.
However, they are likely to betray you. It is merely a matter of time.
You will be left alone when they do.
Holden leaned forward. Do you believe that you are now impenetrable? It is simple to bring you down the first time, and you tend to forget this.
She did not flinch.
That was your error.
You deprived me of my oxygen.
After a brief delay, Holden rose and exited the room, striking the door with such force that it caused her stack of documents to tremble. Rowe entered Marisol's office that evening with 2 substantial manila folders. She dropped the documents on the desk, stating, I believe we have our smoking gun. One memo was labeled Avery, while the other was labeled Penley. Sergeant Tom Avery had signed off on 6 internal memos that contradicted dispatch logs. One memo, in particular, depicted an arrest that never occurred, fake paperwork. Conversely, Penley had authorized those logs without any follow-up, and his signature was present on each one. Rowe massaged her forehead. They are interconnected. These were not isolated incidents. An internal protection cycle was in operation. A number of arrests were never brought to trial. Suspects disappeared. It is all present. Marisol reclined in her chair, her hands clasped in front of her mouth. What is the number of individuals who were aware? At least 6, perhaps even more. However, I suspect that only 3 individuals issued the orders. Riddell had requested legal counsel. 2 officers had called in ill consecutively. The walls were closing in, and people were scrambling for air. They both recognized the 3 individuals, Holden, Avery, and Penley. The others were beginning to crumble one by one. Rumors were circulating in the locker rooms. Marisol remained late that evening, completed the following tasks: labeling each folder, printing copies of all cross-verified reports, and constructing a timeline with Rowe from the earliest confirmed incident to the most recent occurrence. Stop digging. She received a text message from a blocked number at 1:17 a.m.
She flipped the phone over,
but it was too late to issue any cautions. However, just as she was about to escalate the situation to the Department of Justice, an unexpected event occurred, which upset the equilibrium. The call was received on Thursday, and a civilian had been assaulted outside the 9th District Precinct. Marisol was already on site, examining archived footage in her office when Officer Rowe entered, his face pale. Riddell is in the parking lot, she stated. He is experiencing hemorrhaging.
She asserts that
An individual launched themselves at him. Marisol acted without hesitation, escorting Rowe down 2 flights of stairs, and into the rain-slicked lot. He was slouched against the concrete divider, his lips split, his eyes swollen shut, and his torn sleeve dangling by a thread. Riddell muttered, "He said they warned me. He said I should have kept my mouth shut." Marisol sat beside him, her demeanor composed yet unwavering.
She was it, she inquired.
He shook his head, stating, "I did not observe." They donned hoods. However, one of them possessed a gold bracelet, the same one that Avery has consistently worn. She peered at Rowe. No additional commentary was required. The DOJ liaison had been briefed by sundown. The assault of a potential witness in an active federal investigation was serious enough, but the fact that it occurred on department property was significantly more serious. This triggered an automatic freeze, with access codes suspended and badge entries logged. The mayor, who was furious and cornered, then authorized a full public audit. In the now sterile conference room, Marisol sat across from Penley, with mounds of printed evidence separating them. "These are your approvals," she stated, tapping the papers.
You signed off on fabricated arrests. Internal communications were redirected by you. Either you were unaware, or you were involved. Penley endeavored to expand his chest, but his self-assurance was depleted. You have no idea the extent of the stress this department has been experiencing. US community backlash, budget cutbacks. Occasionally, decisions are made to maintain the momentum of the process. She retorted. You failed to maintain the momentum. You trampled on individuals who had placed their trust in us. He submitted quietly, and without much resistance. Penley consented to relinquish his position and collaborate in exchange for leniency. A bargain, not immunity, but a pathway that would prevent him from being incarcerated if he relinquished the remaining responsibilities. Marisol received the statement independently. In the interim, Rowe assembled a comprehensive list of all individuals who were directly associated with the Langford case, including the falsified witness records and missing footage. They worked through the night, fueled by adrenaline and black coffee, and were prepared by Friday morning. Before lunch, the arrest warrants were issued. Holden was awoken from his car in front of a sandwich store, where he was still chewing on a piece of pastrami. 2 federal marshals approached him, and he appeared to be in a state of shock, as if nothing had occurred until that moment. Avery was not even given much notice. His front door was kicked in before daybreak, and his wife screamed. He attempted to flee, but he was unable to do so. 6 additional individuals were killed within the next 24 hours, including 2 patrolmen, a lieutenant, and a forensic clerk, all of whom were connected to the cover-up web. The evening reports were inundated with the news. An internal corruption scandal has shaken Eugene's 9th district. The terms systemic failure and betrayal were employed to describe the situation. Pundits gathered to analyze the narrative, but for Marisol, none of it was about headlines. It was about standing in the hallway that Friday afternoon, watching the same precinct she was carried out of, now surrounded by state vehicles, and officers being escorted in cuffs past the lockers where they had once stored their lies. She did not smile or gloat. However, she did walk slowly down the hall and linger by the squad room door. She scanned the room, stating, "Some of you were involved in this, while others were not." However, it was permitted by all in attendance. Silence permitted it to disseminate. Ignoring it resulted in its strengthening. Liars will be terminated from this point forward. Covering for someone results in your departure. The badge will not be returned to you if it is misused. That is the new standard, not a menace, a pledge. However, Marisol still had one final stop to make, the one individual she had not yet encountered. As order returned and justice took root, she waited until the end of the day, with no entourage or reporters, just herself, and a folder tucked under her arm. Marisol traversed the tranquil hallway of the county prison, passing vending machines and fluorescent lights that flickered intermittently, until she reached the holding area. "I am here to see Brent Holden," she informed the deputy in charge. He gazed at her intently, but did not inquire further. Rather, he ushered her in. Holden sat behind the thick glass, his wrists cuffed in front of him. He appeared paler and older as a result of the assault, and his jaw bore a faint bruise. His uniform had been replaced by orange scrubs and a plastic wristband. She occupied the seat opposite him. He whispered, "I didn't anticipate your attendance." She responded, "I did not come to seek you out. Rather, I came to ascertain the truth." "Truth?" he sneered. "Do you believe that any of this qualifies you as a hero?" She responded with a firm no. "I believe it serves as a warning." He leaned forward, his metal shackles clanking. "Do you believe that I initiated this? Do you believe that I was the sole individual?" "No," she replied. "However, you were the one who derived the most pleasure from it." There was an extended period of silence between them. "You had the respect and the record," Holden murmured. "You could have kept your head down. You would have been promoted to the position of commander, and allow individuals such as yourself to continue poisoning the badge." She inquired. "No, thank you." He turned his gaze away. There were no more smug remarks or quips, only a man in the process of unraveling. Marisol stood, holding the folder in her hand. She struck it against the glass once. "This contains every statement, file, and name associated with your actions. I am not withholding it as a form of retribution. I am retaining it as a reminder to myself of the reason I continue to attend, because there is a child out there who still believes that police are supposed to protect them. For every officer like you. Holden did not respond. She turned and exited the room without a glance back. The late afternoon sun illuminated the pavement, and the atmosphere was serene, not the kind that induces anxiety, but the kind that signified the conclusion of an event. Roe was awaiting her arrival at her office, where she was accompanied by a mound of new files and 2 cups of coffee. "Are you prepared for the second round?" she inquired. Marisol exhaled. "Not yet, however, I shall be." They sat side by side, reviewing complaints from other precincts. The work never ceased, but it now had significance again. She pinned a photo of Langford on her bulletin board and taped a note beneath it that simply read, "Ask the questions anyway." She reflected on the victims, whose cases were interred, and whose voices were ignored, as she drove beyond the city limits that evening. She also recalled her younger self, who was proud and prepared to enter her first uniform, unaware of the weight of the silence that lay ahead, and she contemplated the significance of bearing that burden with both hands, and ensuring that it did not break. Because integrity is not always conspicuous, it does not always receive accolades, and it is not always featured in the media. Occasionally, it enters a building filled with adversaries, and continues to fulfill its obligations. Occasionally, it is the final say. In the end, Marisol did not return to seek revenge. Rather, she returned to serve as a reminder to both herself and others that justice is only effective when it is demanded.